So I don't see it on the back monitor, so. I could look at this monitor and then you'd get the better look inside of me for the whole evening, but it'd be a little awkward. Yeah, I should, but don't. So, this is lesson 2 in our series of lessons on building relationships. This will be 12 parts, so this is the second of 12. The first 6 are going to really focus on relationships in general. What does it take to create them, to build them, to maintain them, and do a little bit of reconciliation or repair work when they go wrong. Because if you have relationships, they will go wrong. And sometimes it will be our fault. So tonight's lesson is on building blocks of good relationships. And it's really, I think, more 4 dimensions of a relationship that we need to assess and kind of be aware of and learn to nurture these aspects of it. But we'll get into that in a minute. So all relationships begin at some common point, some intersection, some common interest, some common value, something that you have in common with another person. At a minimum, it's usually language. But we can work around that if we have to. If we want the relationship to grow, these are the building blocks that we can use to accomplish that goal. So I have been asked to set up a Google Drive folder to hold the PowerPoints and notes, etc. for this class. If you want access to it, send an email to that email address. And I'm going to silence my phone here real quickly so it don't blow up. But there. That's also the email address that's in the bulletin or in the church directory if you have that app on your phone. So be able to reach it either way. Yeah, I am good. I'm fine form. So, a relationship is the way in which one or more concepts, objects, or people are connected. That's the most general definition that I can come up with it. I'm not really interested in concepts or objects in this series here. I'm interested in people connecting to people, specifically Christians connecting to others in that. Relationships are vital to our survival, our mental health, our emotional health, and our spiritual development and growth. We need each other for these things. At a bare minimum, we need to have an economic relationship with somebody because we can't do everything for ourselves, and so we need to find people who can do some of these things for us. So we have been in relationships since we were born, and we will continue to be in them until we die. Relationships can be rewarding, exhausting, painful, or 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3, all at the same time. Good relationships enrich us. That's the ones we want to form, and that's one of the reasons that we want to form them. Bad relationships harm us. They can harm our mental health, our emotional health, even our physical health. Attempt to have no relationships at all can ruin all of these aspects of us. We are not islands unto ourselves, and we cannot live in isolation very well. There's a reason why solitary confinement is one of the most feared things in modern American prisons, or any other prison, because of the lack of relationships. So if we want to have good relationships, we must take proper care of them. It's just like anything else that we do that matters to us. You have to invest a little bit of time and energy in those aspects of it. There are principles that guide the formation and maintenance of relationships. Now, I've listed these here. These are very particular to Christians, but I will argue that if you practice these, and if anyone practices these in the relationships that they value, they will be better relationships and be enriched of it. So the first principle, love God and love one another. Second principle, treat one another well. Third, appreciate one another. Edify, build up one another, or empathize with one another. And these are all ways that we are going to relate to each other. And a lot of this will depend, of course, on the depth of the relationship that we have with an individual. But even in casual relationships, practicing these tools can be a benefit to us. So, any questions or comments before we get into tonight's main discussion? All right, what are my options? We like having options. We're going to have options on relationships. What are my options? We all have a wide range of people that we encounter every day. Some of them are friends, some of them are neighbors, some of them are family and spouses. If you shop at a grocery store on a regular basis, you're at least aware that you're seeing some of the same people in there as both working there and customers of these places. Most of these do not result in what we might call deep and meaningful relationships. I put that in quotes because I'm not certain that we really understand it, and not certain that that's the one we have to go for in every relationship anyway. These deep and meaningful relationships require time and investment. And we don't have enough of either of these to form these relationships, a deep and meaningful relationship with everyone we meet. So relationships will vary based upon how much we interact with them and how important they are. Your spousal relationship, probably important to you. If it's not, you're probably not in one anymore. So, friends and things like that, that's important to us. Being here as part of this congregation is a relationship that should be valuable to us. And so we want to invest in these relationships. Some people are difficult to form close relationships with. There are some things that can cause this. One of the things that can do this is a personality problem. People rub each other the wrong way, and you've probably been around people like that they're perfectly fine and there's nothing wrong with you, but they kind of drive you nuts because you don't think like I do, or your reactions to things are a little bit different. Another reason why these might be a problem is because there's past issues with this individual. Sometimes these have to be dealt with. Some people are just flat out hard to get along with, and you don't really want to trust them as far as you can throw them because of their reputation, because of what you know about them. So these can be, you're not going to form close relationships with them. You're probably avoiding it. The basic principle in Romans chapter 12, verse 18, it says, "If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men." So what's the starting point for our interaction with other human beings? Peace. And here, this peace is from a Greek word that means to keep the peace or to be at peace. And this is not really the shalom that we have that Paul uses when he says grace and peace, shalom, wishing you prosperity and well-being, things like that. This is absence of conflict. So don't go into the relationship looking for a fight. Go into it and be calm and courteous and collected and let it go someplace from there. As much as it's up to us, do that. Sometimes it's not, and then we have to kind of, put some distance between us and the individual that's being troublesome here. Relationship challenges. Relationships can be strained when we don't have important common interests and goals. And I highlighted the word important there because there are lots of different common interests and goals and things like that we can have. For example, we both might enjoy the same form of entertainment. We might enjoy the same form of physical activity, or the same type of books, or the same type of something else, or we might have a common goal of we're working for the same employer, and so we want them to be successful so that we can continue to have a job and get paid. Those types of relationships are kind of like relationships of opportunity that we'll be in for a while. But when I don't like that form of entertainment, or I'm too old to play volleyball anymore, or I change jobs or something like that, the relationships that we form during that time typically don't sustain. So here, to have an enduring relationship, you need to have something in common of an interest or a goal, and it has to be important to both of you. That really helps if you want to sustain the relationship. Mentioned personality clashes, and in the 1980s, there was a big thing in American corporations where we studied personality a lot. And there's a website called 16 Personalities. Just Google that phrase and it'll take you there, and you can take a personality test, and they'll give you a 4-letter designation for what personality that you are, whether you're introvert, extrovert, judgmental, or work on intuitive thinking or something like that. And then if you want to pay them money, they'll help you, nurture skills and things on that. The test itself is free. Everybody in the 80s took one of these things. And it was supposed to cure all of our issues. with getting along with each other. You didn't get to take that?
No, I had my personality.
Oh. Deluded? Is that what you said? So, but, and it turns out it didn't. Because in the long run, character matters more than personality. You might not see things the way that I see them, and we can still get along. And, that never was totally the issue. If, my ego's out of check or out of control, there's no amount of personality training that you can do that's going to solve that. So that's kind of character is more important. We can adapt to each other if we care and we're wanting to invest in it. Otherwise, it's not going to work, period. Yes?
We have a natural tendency to focus and to look for the things that make us different rather than the things we have in common. And it's extremely important in any sort of evangelism. I have to look for the important things we have in common. There's often that person may have very different ideas about a lot of different things. But while we may disagree on morality, they may have a very strong belief in being moral, even if we don't agree on what that looks like. And finding those common things, we just have a natural tendency to look for the differences rather than the common.
Yeah. But we do try to build on the common. That's kind of a key point there, is what do we have in common that gives us a basis for understanding? I'm going to make a point about the differences a little bit later on in this particular lesson, but we do tend to start with where we're in, what we have in common. You form a relationship with your cellmate and your cellmate in prison because you're cellmates. We have this cell in common. That's not a foundation for a really good relationship, but that's one that we would do in that situation. That might be the only thing we have in common in that case. Hopefully we can find better stuff. Common's important there. Difference is also important, so hold on to that idea. Any other questions or comments? All right. As Christians, our relationship to each other is not based on personality, likability, common interest, etc. It is based upon we have a common Father. We have a common Savior. We have a common hope. We have a common purpose, and we have a common mission. Now, we have so much in common with each other that it takes a serious lack of love, agape love, or extreme laziness or some serious effort not to have a relationship under those circumstances. Now, again, that will vary by individual, other interests and things like that, but we have all of these things in common. And especially when we look at the idea we have the common Savior. We're part of a common body. That's an emphasis in the New Testament. And Paul managed to convince the Jews and Christians in his day who really disliked each other that we need to be loving towards one another. We need to have a relationship with one another because we have all these things in common. And we can do no different today. We should be focused on that as much as they were at that time. And sometimes it will be challenging, but we do have this. So, how to build good relationships? 4 key components to building a good relationship: compatibility, cooperation, intimacy, and emotional support. These are skills that we want to master in our relationships, and we want to master them appropriately. And what I mean by appropriately is don't go nuts and overdo it in every relationship that you have. There's an appropriate level of compatibility, cooperation, intimacy, and emotional support, depending upon the relationship that we're talking about there. Learn that and exercise it. That will help the relationship persist and to grow. So, compatibility. Because we are all different, and we look at the world different, we have different experiences, we have different personalities, we have different, all these things, different ages and things like that. Incompatibility is basically baked into every relationship that we have. Every close relationship must deal with this challenge. We have all of these things that make us incompatible. And here's point number 1. These differences also make good relationships. So we want to be compatible, but we don't want to be identical. I mean, think about that for a second. Why would I choose an opinionated, contrary, sarcastic guy, with my values and my goals and my ambitions or lack thereof, or characteristics and things like that, to be my friend? I've already got all of that covered. Now, if that's what you're looking for, then, maybe we need to talk. But I don't need another person in the relationship with me that's just exactly like me. There's no value in that. I already know the answer to every question that you're going to ask that person, or every reaction that that person's going to do. There's nothing there that's surprising or challenging. Although, to be perfectly honest, if I was my own best friend, I would drive myself nuts. I would. And it wouldn't even surprise me. So the differences do make good relationships. And so when we're talking about being compatible, we want to make sure that we allow room for the differences, because that's the thing. That's kind of the fun part. Consider the marriage relationship. And this is Jesus talking in Matthew 19, verse 5. For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That was actually written the first time in the book of Genesis, when Adam met Eve, and he said, this is what it's going to be all about. Everybody, when you get married, how many of you found some aspects of this very surprising?
Still flames.
Well, that's, yeah. I mean, her family did different customs, for the holidays. And, yeah, her family did different customs than the family I grew up in. I kind of had to learn to adapt on this. There were certain expectations that I had that didn't really line up with her expectations, and we kind of had to learn to adapt and do this. In fact, to be successful in the marital relationship, you must adapt. Have to do that. It's a two-sided thing. She's had to do her share of adapting too. She learned sarcasm. She learned sarcasm as a self-defense mechanism. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where she got that from. So you have to adapt. And so is change the answer to incompatibility? So if we're incompatible in a relationship that you and I have, should we both be really working on changing aspects of things like that so that we'll be completely compatible? And the answer is yes and no. First of all, the Bible teaches change. We just did a class on that in Christian Living where we talked about change and we talked about transformation and we talked about regeneration and renewal and things like that. That's some serious change that the Bible teaches. Repentance is change. Change of mind or change of heart that leads to a change in action. Transformation is change. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove that what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Be transformed. So we're going to do these types of things. However, the change that we're talking about here is this is change to character. This is change to our eternal goals, maybe some of our values and things like that. But it's not necessarily a change to personality. It's not necessarily a change in perspective or experience. See, that's changing the parts of the relationship. That changes the aspect of the relationship. It's going to make it fun or make it different or make it challenging or make it enriching. So yes, character should change. We should become more godlike. We should be more Christ-like. But you were made with a certain set of physical traits and a certain set of emotional traits and personality traits and things like that. And those are yours. Nurture them and use them correctly, but don't expect everybody to change to match you. So compatibility is really, let's get our goals lined up here. What I need to do to adapt to you, and not annoy you or what have you, I'll do that, and you will do the same for me. But you're still who you are, and I hope that you're still as joyful and as quixotic or however you choose to be, or however you are. You should still be that. But we might have to adapt a little bit along the way, and then that will improve our compatibility. Questions or comments? Gene?
I think you have to be careful there, because the danger is eroding that trust that you originally, to me, had, that attracted, hopefully, you to
Mhm.
each other. I mean, a radical change is like, whoa, what's going on here? Is this the woman I,
Yeah.
thought? It
See,
just,
I didn't have to change that radically. She didn't either. She was perfect.
some of us have.
But I did have to clean up my act, I have to say that. There's a lot of my act that did need to be polished up and, dressed up a little bit better.
Most of us hope to marry up.
Yeah. Okay, cooperation. This is really important in relationships. Relationships will falter when we do not learn how to work together. I'm going to give you an employment example that I had. I used to work for Bell Labs, AT&T Bell Labs, several years ago, and that's supposedly a really top flight organization, stuff like that. The way that they rated their employees was on a competitive basis. And so literally, if you and I were both employees of Bell Labs and I knew things that you didn't know, it was in my self-interest not to share that with you. Because in a competitive rating system, I rate higher than that. And if you don't have it, well, that's, your tough luck. Well, what happens when you know something that I don't know? You're keeping that from me, you selfish maggot. You're holding out on me here on stuff that I needed to know to do my job, because it was in your self-interest. And they had a terrible time with that. They ultimately ended up failing when it came down to it, because they had built this into their culture. Tried to change it, never really worked out. Constant conflict and competition can destroy a relationship. When we are not working together, when we're always competing, when we're always in conflict and things like that, that's when a relationship goes bad. And if we do it enough, there's no recovery from it. Conflict and competition are zero-sum encounters. And what I mean by that is, if I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. Cooperation does not work that way. If you win, we win. If I win, we win. And if we win, that's even better. That enriches and builds a relationship. Now, does that mean that people in a relationship can't compete? Yeah, play a card game, do a little bit competitive things and stuff like that. That's okay. But you got to keep it in its proper perspective there. This is not life and death. This is us enjoying a little game or doing some things that on a competitive basis. And I would say, watch that this doesn't become a habit, that you're competing on everything. That's okay. But, we don't want to get into a situation where in a relationship we're constantly competing, because that will kill the relationship. Galatians 5:13-15 says, "For you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is summed in one word in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, take care lest you be consumed by one another." That yellow highlight there, that's the one we're yelling for in our relationships to each other, to God. That one that's in the blue highlight, that's a competitive environment there. That's like predator competitive environment, and that works really well as long as you're the alpha predator. When you're not, you're food. So strive for the yellow and avoid the cyan in that passage. Be a lot better off in the long run. Any questions or comments? Cooperation again. Some other references to look at: Acts chapter 2, verses 43-47, and chapter 4, verse 32. Both of these passages are really emphasizing when the church was established on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem. There are a lot of people in Jerusalem and out of town that were staying to learn from the apostles. And, when you're on a road trip, you don't usually take everything you own with you. And so there was a need for them to share things that they had in common with each other in order that they could do this for a while and have everybody learn and grow in the gospel. And they were quite willing to do that. The first century church was quite willing to do that. Learning to work together is a skill that we must acquire. We've got to learn to share, don't we? We've got to learn to play together. I read a book a long time ago. Everything valuable I learned in kindergarten. because that's at a young age where we start to develop these social aspects of our neighbor. It's my toy. No, but you need to share it. And then they need to share with you. And then you need to learn how to do the puzzle together or play the blocks together or do all of these things together. That's kind of the core of being a human being who's going to be involved in the relationships in the future. And it isn't always easy. The early Christians struggled with this, the Jews versus the Greeks. The Jews thought that they were the religious elite, and the Greeks thought that they were the intellectuals of the ancient world and much smarter than everybody else. And so when you have two massive egos, essentially, trying to occupy the same space, a lot of conflict that's just built right into it right there. But they had to learn to accept and value each other. So when Paul's writing to them, that's the environment he's in, and then talking about these things don't matter here. Go back to the things we have in common. Common Father, common faith, common Savior, common love, common mission. And in the long run, the fact that the Jews and the Greeks eventually learned to master this to some degree was both essential for the cause of Christ and something that enriched them both. So you can even have two good reasons for doing the right thing here. Questions, Richard?
I'm going to pull Gene on you and just go back just a step.
Okay, and I'm going to ignore you like I did you.
Like I do.
Yeah.
You mentioned personality,
Mhm.
and now we're on cooperation.
Mhm.
I think sometimes we don't appreciate one another's personalities. God creates us with those personalities for different reasons, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, there's some strong personalities that do strong, you know what I mean, and some other things. And I think one of the things that in the cooperation thing is to understand and appreciate a person's personality instead of judging it.
Yeah.
Now the character and stuff we develop that and build it. Personality is what God's given you. I think.
I agree with that. Absolutely. Comment over here?
Yeah, I was just thinking about Galatians chapter 2, where Peter was an example, and he was leading others. You know, he was socialized with the Jews when they were around,
Of the Greeks.
and to the Greeks,
Yeah.
and then when the Jews came around, then he would not. And the passage goes on to say that even Barnabas followed his pattern that he was leading, and to me that would be so horrifying to realize that I've influenced somebody else to do something that's not acceptable in the sight of God. And of course, Galatians 2:20 talks about it's no longer I live, but Christ who lives in me. And that refers to loving one another, and especially those who are different, those who may have a different background, different nationality, different. We're not to be prejudiced whatsoever, and we're to love each other equally and to serve one another. And I think some of the best managers I've had are ones that served and worked alongside you instead of just trying to control everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, we do have to learn that skill that we have to master right there. And Paul did the right thing when he called him out on it too. All right, let's move along here. Intimacy. As a peculiar term in a marital relationship, I'm not talking about that, okay? Close relationships come from opening up to one another, and the marriage relationship being the most intimate relationship that we will form, in this lifetime. But relationships don't work without some degree of trust and an appropriate level of intimacy with each other. There are things that you can and should share with your friends. There are things that you can and should share with your congregation. That's one of the reasons we have a prayer list, is because people are facing hardships and things like that. And if somebody were to face this all by themselves and we found out about it, we should maybe be a little bit irritated with them because you didn't let us help with that. We didn't know. You didn't give us an opportunity to serve and an opportunity to help. So we do have to do this. And of course, the obvious danger of this is once you grow to care and love one another, you can and probably will be hurt. I mean, that's just hard facts of life. You're going to get hurt in a relationship, and even worse, you're probably going to hurt somebody in a relationship.
Can I ask you on intimacy, how you would define it in the sense of, I understand the sharing and stuff, but intimacy means something a little deeper, a little more personal and stuff.
Well,
So how would you do that between friends?
how well do I know you?
Yes,
Yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah.
how it
I mean, that's the goal right there, is how well do I know the person that I'm in that relationship with, you know, based upon the information, you know, that I have at this particular point, what they've shared with me, and particularly things like their backgrounds and what I've shared with them. You should be able to predict the pattern of behavior given a
So
situation
that
out
would
of
be
it.
intimacy to you,
Yeah.
learning those things.
Yeah,
For me, the key word on all this is vulnerability. It is the more vulnerable you are with a person, that is where intimacy comes, and especially when you come with marriage. There is no greater vulnerable place than you can be than in a marriage relationship. And but as you become more vulnerable, you also run a greater risk.
yeah, you do.
And the hurt that can happen from that is much, much greater. But God has created in such a way that vulnerability with the right person, when people are working together with godly love, it pays off.
Yeah, again, that's what we're going for though, isn't it, in the relationship? So that's part of the reward mechanism of it, but like you said, more at risk, higher reward, you know, higher risk of disappointment with it, so, you know, and I only put that up there because if it's scary to you, learn to invest in relationships anyway. You know, it's gonna happen. I'm sorry, you know, everybody's been dumped or all of this, you know, that kind of a thing. I gotta get moving here. This is Jesus talking to his disciples, and basically he says, I no longer call you slaves, but I call you friends. He's raising the level of intimacy with his disciples there. You know, when he's about to face, you know, dying on the cross there, and he's working with them, he's bringing them up a little more into his, you know, intimate type of relationship. And then emotional support, gotta go this quick here. Everybody's gonna need this at some point in life, period. Can't avoid it. And a lack of emotional support from someone who can reasonably be expected to provide it is a major cause of broken relationships. This is a story trope that you will hear a lot of time in any story that you're encountering is the you weren't there when I needed you. Or I wasn't there when you needed me, but that you broke the relationship by not providing the emotional support. Spouses and family are reasonable relationships that should provide this, and so is the church. That's why I think if somebody has something happen to them and they don't tell us about it, we have the right people sometimes need this in times that we don't really expect it. My father died. I was running around feeling all sorry for myself, and then I stopped and took a look at my wife, and I realized, wait a second. I lost a father. She lost a really close friend and a mentor. And I had to readjust my thinking on it. It was not I was mourning, we were mourning. So that's important as well. So emotional support is not trying to fix the situation or offer some senseless platitude. It turns out that not everything happens for a reason. It turns out that maybe not everybody wants to find another spouse or have another kid in terms of tragic loss. And so, you know, don't do that. Also, don't forget the moments of joy for emotional support. That's important too. Sharing the joy with somebody, just like we would share in the weeping with them. Let's see. So, here's my summary. We need good relationships. We've known it all along. As Christians, we have much in common with each other, and that's already a baked-in reason for us to have a relationship with each other. Compatibility, cooperation, intimacy, emotional support. These apply to our deepest relationships, and the deeper the relationship is, the more that these are going to be present in there. And finally, don't ever forget this. The different perspectives and experiences we have bring value to our relationships. It's not only good that you see things differently than me, it's actually to my advantage to let you tell me how you see them and why. That broadens my mind, and then do the same for you. Questions or comments? Yes?
The last 2 points, the intimacy and emotional support, are so connected. Because in order for me to seek out emotional support, there needs to be a level of intimacy and trust. And if that's not there, I don't feel comfortable seeking out emotional support. So sometimes when people aren't telling the congregation or people around them about their troubles, it's because we failed to build trust and intimacy with them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anything else? We're like 4 minutes past due here, so I gotta let you go. Thank